Okay, so to attempt to go through these notes quickly, we are going to just kind of, not take a ton of time for simple questions like this very beginning one, but this is a great way to introduce this idea of genetics. Why don't we look like rhinos? Well, very simply, our parents don't. Okay, so we don't look like rhinos because our parents don't look like rhinos. All right, and that brings us to heredity. One second, please. There we go. Okay, I'm ready. Heredity is the passing of genetic material from parent to offspring. And if you look at these pictures, I love these pictures because they do a really good job of explaining this. You look at the pictures on the left, that is Goldie Hawn and her daughter, Kate Hudson. You definitely should know Kate Hudson. She's a famous actress at this time. And you can see they have a lot of similarities. And that's because the genetic material from Goldie Hawn has been passed down to Kate Hudson. If you look on the right, you see Reese Witherspoon. She's another famous actress of today. She's standing there with her daughter. So again, they look very similar, and it's because the genetic material has been passed down from parent to offspring. This is the science of genetics, which can also be called the study of genes. Okay, and we're not talking blue genes, we're talking DNA genes. Okay, a gene is one set of instructions for an inherited trait. And I do apologize for the little bit of messy writing. It just happens to be the computer program that I'm using to be able to write on this right now. Okay, so we have genes, and they are a set of instructions for an inherited trait. So you have genes for your blue eyes, or you have genes for your brown hair. Now, who is Gregor Mendel? Gregor Mendel, just to be very brief, it says on your notes that you need to write a short little biography. I'll tell you just a little bit about him real quick. He's a monk who did mostly research. He discovered the principles of heredity in his monastery garden, and he worked with pea plants and saw that patterns of inheritance were not always clear. So we weren't sure if we took a purple flower and a white flower and we crossed them together, we thought we might get something that would be a mixture of purple and white, but we ended up getting all purple. So what we thought would be very clear ended up not being so clear. So he investigated a little bit more. Why did he pick pea plants? He picked them because they're quickly growing. They cross-pollinate, which means that flowers from one plant can pollinate flowers from another plant, and they can also self-pollinate, which means that the flowers from one plant can pollinate that same plant. It becomes very important here when we talk about the work of Mendel. And in that work of Mendel, first we have to talk a little bit about flower anatomy, which we have done this before, not in this class, but you've done this in 6th grade. Stamens, okay, and the stamen is over here, all right, and that produces pollen, which contains the male sex cell, which is known as sperm. And we have the pistil, produces the female sex cell, egg. Self-pollination is the fact that pollen from one flower can fertilize the exact same plant. So that would be like if the pollen from this stamen right here, this male part of the flower, was able to fertilize the female part of the flower right there. The same flower, same pollination. So if we were to talk about cross-pollination, we would have the pollen from this one going to another flower, another plant, to cross-pollinate with another plant. Mendel's experiments. Well, this can be easily explained. He did two. He crossed pea plants to study the different characteristics, but in his first one, he took purple pea plants and he crossed them with white pea plants. And what did he get? He got all purple offspring. Every single plant that was produced as a result of the cross of purple and white ended up being purple, and this is what we call the first generation. Okay, that's a first generation. We then took this purple, or Mendel took this purple, and in his second experiment, okay, this would be number 2, his second experiment, he took all of these first generation plants and he allowed them to self-pollinate. So we have all purple plants self-pollinating, and what do we get? We got mostly purple and a little bit of white. The different generations, we have first generation and we have second generation. The characteristics are now called dominant trait and recessive trait. What are those? Well, we're going to talk about that here in a second. But an allele is an alternative form of the gene. So when we're talking about the gene for hair color, an allele can be either brown or blue. And it depends on whether or not one of them is dominant, which one you have. So the dominant is the one that shows when paired with a recessive. Okay, hopefully you can understand what I'm saying and match it up with your writing, because this pen is not working as well as I wanted it to. So the recessive is then the trait that doesn't show when paired with a dominant trait. Okay, and this little chart down here is just to get us focused on identifying the dominant one. Okay, so we know we're going to circle the dominant, put a box around the recessive, and we know that in the first generation, okay, generation 1, that is going to be a result of which one was dominant from the parents. So we see purple flowers, we know the purple one was dominant. We see axial flowers, we know axial was dominant. We see yellow seeds, we know that yellow was dominant. We see round seeds, they were dominant. Inflated, green, tall, because they are all down here. They were the result of the first generation, so they are the dominant genes. They're the ones that show. Now we get into something else called phenotype, and this is an organism's physical appearance. Okay, so this would be like blue eyes, or brown hair, or curly hair. The genotype is the actual genetic makeup of a characteristic. So this would be like down here when we start to put these alleles together, like NN, or capital N lowercase n, or lowercase n lowercase n. Okay, it doesn't really matter. It's the actual genes that go into making it. A term called homozygous is when you have two dominant alleles or two recessive alleles. An example of that would be if we had capital T, or we'll use our example that we've been using for flowers, for purple. We'll say capital P for purple flowers, or lowercase p. Now the example for heterozygous is a dominant and recessive pair together. So an example of this would be capital P lowercase p. Alright, what I want you to do is I want you to try this out on your own. Before we go through, we'll do the first couple together, but then I'm going to give it up to you, and you'll have to check the notes that are on blended schools. So identify if the following traits are phenotypes or genotypes. Blue eyes, because it's a physical characteristic, that is phenotype, and TT, because it's the actual genes, that would be genotype. Okay, identify if the following are homozygous or heterozygous. TT, capital T, they are the same size, so they are homozygous. And I'm going to throw another term out here. Because they're both capital, they're both dominant. So it's technically homozygous dominant. This one, they're both different, so it would be heterozygous. Okay, go ahead and complete the rest. On pause the video, and then you can move on. Alright, the next part here is the law of segregation. And we're going to change that right away to say the law of separation. And all the law of separation states is that when the parent cells and the gene alleles separate to form the sex cells, sperm and egg. Okay, so these are parent cells, they're sex cells that each take one allele. So if we look here, purple flowers, capital P, dominant over white flowers, lowercase p. During the formation of sex cells called meiosis, the two alleles separate. Okay, so if we had a genotype of PP, what this is going to say is that the two alleles are going to separate during sex cell formation. So one is going to go to one sperm, another is going to go to another sperm, so that one sperm could have a dominant P or a recessive P. Now the same thing happens for females. Okay, same thing happens in the eggs. Why does each sex cell only have half of the genetic material? Well, that's because when you cross female and male, you take both half of the genetic material, so you have 1/2 plus 1/2 equals 1 whole. So you get 1 whole being. In the next part, we talk about Punnett squares. So the probability is the likelihood or the chance that a particular event will take place. And probability can be used to predict genetic crosses by using what we call Punnett squares. Alright, so essentially this is just predicting what would happen if we crossed two beings together and what the results would be. So we have a father which is heterozygous, and we're going to say that T represents height. Okay, so T represents height. So we have he's heterozygous, he has a big T and a little t. Mom has a big T and a little t. So now we just follow the arrows. This T goes over here, big T. This T goes over here, little t. This T goes here, big T. This T goes there, little t. Now what we do is we cross them. Okay, so we take dad's gene, put it down. Mom's gene, put it down. Two big T's. We take dad's gene, put it down. Mom's gene. For this box, and I'm going to highlight this, wherever you see this stuff, you always have to put the dominant allele first. Don't get into a habit of putting the little t first and then the big T. So here you have dad's genes, big T, little t, and here you get little t, little t. Now we go down to genotype and phenotype. You have to look in this section for the different genotypes. All these are different genotypes. So you look at the possibilities of genotypes here. You have TT, you have TT, and you have TT. Now you look at the percentages. There's 1 out of 4 boxes right here that has TT. That's 25%. You have 2 out of 4 boxes here. That's a 50%. And you have 1 right there. That's 25%. So now you look at phenotypes. You're either going to have short or tall. Okay, and in 3 of the 4 boxes, you have at least one dominant allele, so that gives you 75%, 3 out of 4. In only 1, you have no dominant allele, so that's all recessive. Okay, you would have short. So I hope this helps. I know I went kind of quick, but you can go back and look at it. Come see me with any questions. I'm going to post another video with some more Punnett square practice, but good luck.